Hello there. Today we are looking at World War I final blows. And we had other videos, or I had other videos. I say we because you are watching them. I'm talking. And it's interesting, and I like the interaction. We had other videos. The whole series, Nationalistic Chain Reactions in Europe. And I know I'm starting about 4 minutes late. Sorry about that. Nationalistic Chain Reactions in Europe, 1815 to 1914. There were many parts to that. Then we had World War I, the causes, the breakout, or the outbreak of the war, I mean to say. Then we go into the stalemate. And now we're leading up to the final blows. I have some Old English 800 brand malt liquor, Old English brand 800 malt liquor, whatever, however you say it. I was going to do this in a hangout, but I figured I'll just drink it. It's not too hard to get these 18-ounce bottles. Nice smoke. 5.6% alcohol. It's at the very low end of malt liquor as far as ABV, alcohol by volume. Malt liquor being an extra strong beer, typically lager, but not exclusively lager, as indicated by the Guinness Extra Stout label. Little skunk there, but more roasted grain possibly. Okay, so the First World War, or maybe better to describe it these days as we are looking back on the last 100 years, the World War Part 1, 1914 to 1918, the World War Part 2, 1939 to 1945, and the World War Part 3, also known as the Cold War, 1944 to the present. That might be a better, more accurate way to look at it, because all three are linked together, and they're like three phases of a single conflict to a large extent. We already talked about how the First World War was, on the whole, caused by and wrapped around this ongoing conflict between the British Empire and the German Empire, an economic rivalry and a rivalry just for power in the world. Great Britain, the established world power that had been more or less looking to, and to a large extent doing, the project of running the world since 1689. And then we have this up and comer, this new kid on the block, the German Empire, the Second Reich, the German Empire of the Hohenzollerns. Little Germany as opposed to big Germany, meaning that Austria, the huge areas of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, were not included in the new Reich. Okay. In this rivalry, the Germans looking for allies, the British looking for allies, and getting them, comes to a head July 28th, 1914, with the declaration of war by Austria-Hungary upon Serbia. We also know that it broke out, it initially was two countries, but it very quickly broke out into this generalized war that spread all over the world. What else do we know? The United States declared neutrality, but we also know that the Woodrow Wilson administration had very close ties to the British establishment via Princeton University and New York Times, the Eastern establishment. So there was a very, you could say, a symbiotic relationship, maybe more like a malignant relationship between the Eastern establishment and the British Empire, which is still quite obviously continuing today. So you're going to notice, you've noticed over the course of studying that although the Wilson administration declared neutrality, there was a pretty obvious attempt to gradually pull the U.S. more into involvement to aid Great Britain. Naturally, the British are going to encourage that because perhaps Britain can win without the involvement of the United States. But if the United States gets involved in this war, Britain is guaranteed to win. So they're going to always be trying to buy time. The war drags out. It doesn't necessarily hurt. I mean, it's going to hurt them, but it doesn't hurt their chances of winning. Because the more the war goes on, the more likely the U.S. will get involved. On the other hand, the Germans have no interest in fighting the United States at all, because they might win without the U.S. involved, although it's doubtful if you look at the order of battle and the setup in August 1914. But if the U.S. gets involved, their chances of winning are essentially zero. And this is the same scenario we have in 1939 to 41. The chances of Germany winning in that second round were low. The chances of Great Britain winning without the United States were reasonably good. For surviving were exceptionally good, but for winning were even good. And the chance that the British would win if the United States jumped in 1941 was almost guaranteed, unless Germany would invent some weapon that was beyond anyone's capability to deal with. They did not have that capability, we know that. No such weapon came. 1914, we know that the battle or the war became largely a stalemate. On the Eastern Front, you have the Austro-Hungarian and German forces arrayed against the vast Russian Empire, but rather weak, relatively weak Russian Empire. So the Russians initially invaded Austria and Germany in the opening weeks of the war, but they were defeated. And then they were pushed slowly through 1914 and 15 out of Poland. And then by 1916, the battle is pushing into White Russia and Russia. And Germany's and Austria-Hungary are beating Russia, beating them in battles, a series of battles, but not ultimately winning, you see. So this is bad for Germany and Austria-Hungary because they're caught up in this battle of movement on the Eastern Front. Territory, you know, it's not like on the Western Front. We'll get to that in a minute. But it's still chopping up the reserves, the health, the wealth, the resources of the Central Powers. Go down to the Turkish Empire. They seem to be very weak, and it looked like if they got involved, they would lose in a year. They foolishly joined the war on behalf of Germany in 1914, late 14. But they did not collapse like the British and French thought. When they landed at Gallipoli in 1915 on the coast of what we call Turkey today, they thought they could march on in, take Constantinople, and cause Turkey to surrender, the Ottoman Empire, run by the Turks, ethnic group. This did not, in fact, happen. The Turks were much harder to defeat than they had first believed. So that was an ignominious failure. The British and French were forced to withdraw. They invaded the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, from the southeast through what we call Iraq today, Kuwait and Iraq. That also ended initially in a disastrous failure for the British in a series of battles near Baghdad. Then they had also attempted to enter the empire, Ottoman Empire, through Egypt, occupied Egypt. And that was also difficult. So the Ottoman Empire did not collapse in a year. And in fact, they held on and continued to fight until October 1918, only weeks before the Germans surrendered. So this was a shock. Well, they started to collapse in September, but this was a shock because this was not supposed to happen. The Ottoman Empire was not supposed to become such a problem. Now, there's some outlier countries like Romania joining on the Allied side in 1916, and they were defeated within a year. They made a terrible decision to join. Bulgaria joined the Central Powers on the German side and gained some territory, but it ultimately did them no good once the Germans lost, and they had to give up territory. So that was a big mistake. We know Italy was neutral. Italy was a part of the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, the dual empire in Italy. But Italy was actually more of an enemy of Austria-Hungary, and they had no reason to join this war. So when it broke out, they exited the Triple Alliance, and the next year, 1915, they joined the Allies against Germany and Austria. much to their detriment, because Italy accomplished very little in this war aside from having over 600,000, yeah, I said that correctly, over 600,000 of their soldiers killed, not to mention the wounded, bankrupt in their country to gain a few scraps of territory. And their country was so bankrupt and disorganized and corrupt and decimated after this war that Italy fell, their government fell to the fascist party in 1922, and the king appointed Mussolini as the prime minister of Italy. He remained in that position until 1943. If Italy had stayed out of the war, Mussolini probably would have never, he probably would have remained in the Socialist Party and continued to promote basically communism in Italy. And he would have taken that route. Okay. On the Western Front, we know that the war very quickly bogged down into a stalemate in northern France, northeastern and northern France. Can't say northwestern France because that's jutting out into the Atlantic Ocean. But from the Belgian coastline along into France and down to the French-German border to Switzerland, that area of trench warfare did not shift much either way for 4 years. The Germans planned to, their plan was to blast into France and capture Paris, causing France to drop out of the war. They didn't really want to fight France. In fact, well, we won't go into all the causes. That was already talked about. This failed. They got 14 miles from Paris, and that's impressive, but they didn't capture Paris. So their goal was not achieved. They were pushed back from the Paris suburbs, back up into France, more northern parts of France, where the trenches were dug, and these terrible battles went back and forth for 4 years. Bleeding France dry, bankrupt in the country. Bleeding Germany dry, bankrupt in the country. Bleeding Great Britain dry. Great Britain lost the British Empire. We're talking about England, France, England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland. And when we say Great Britain in 1914, we mean Canada was still a British colony. Ireland was a British colony. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Newfoundland, Jamaica. These are all still British colonies. Okay. 900,000 men killed, many more than in World War II. And women too, but mostly males. And Great Britain never really recovered from World War I. It was so expensive. They really began to slip after this war. So we can see that none of these countries accomplished a whole lot in this war except to hurt themselves, to cause 10 million people to die. And that was my point initially with this video series, that the best thing these countries could have done was never get into World War I. There was so much to gain, so much to lose, and very little at all to gain. And that's a controversial position I've noticed to take. You probably watched video, if you watched many of my videos, to take an anti-war stance, and I've always had this anti-war approach. It's controversial. You would think, well, no, people don't like war. If you take an anti-war position, you'd be celebrated. But no, you get a lot of attacks if you take an anti-war position. This is true. Okay, but we're not going to change. I'm not going to change. I'm going to continue to oppose these wars of aggression. Okay, well, now let's go on up to where we are. 1916, Germany is beginning to fade, and a big part of this is the British blockade. Great Britain's army wasn't too big, and the British realized they didn't really need a big army, but that sea power was so important. And the United States followed this idea in the late 1890s, 1800s, 1880s, 1890s by creating a very big navy, and then eventually a two-ocean navy, Eastern Fleet, Western Fleet, and then digging the Panama Canal to move ships back and forth. Okay, so they know this is the key. It's good to have a big army and all this equipment and modern technology and all these things, but the key is sea power, the Navy, because it gives you great mobility and you can surround and bottle up the enemy. And this is what the British did all the time since 1588 when they defeated the Spanish Armada. Had this big, strong, flexible Navy. So when the war broke out, they began to put put this iron blockade on the German-Austro-Hungarian alliance and start to squeeze them. And the British were very ruthless. No country is as ruthless as Great Britain. Well, okay, let me take that back. There are countries as ruthless as Great Britain, obviously. I don't know if there's any countries more ruthless. But the British have they're very adept at presenting things in an acceptable manner. They can commit the most outrageous atrocities in these wars, but they're presented in a way that people will think that they're doing good. But then you look at the Germans and the Russians, they're very bumbling and sort of like, they don't have finesse, so they'll do these terrible atrocities also, but they don't present it. They don't have a good way, and we call this in psychology the framing effect. They don't have a good way of framing what they do. So when the Germans do these things, people are appalled. When the British do them, people are either not appalled or they don't, in most cases, know about it. Because we also know that Great Britain, they are past masters of propaganda. They are the masters of propaganda and intelligence, the greatest military intelligence on the planet. Okay, so when the war starts, they launch this intelligence apparatus, so they know what the Germans are doing all the time. The German intelligence agency is good, but compared to Great Britain, it's not good. And that would be any country in the world, except maybe Israel is renowned. All right, United States, good too. Russia, good. Great Britain, the best. Okay, so that is going to be a great advantage in both wars and even today. It's not all brute strength that wins the day. And now the British Navy, they're strangling Germany. Now Germany responds with some naval battles, especially in 1916, the Battle of Jutland, which is a tie, technically on paper, a German victory by, a little bit. But in reality, it's a loss, because the whole goal of the Battle of Jutland was to come out of the Baltic Sea into the North Sea, beat the British in a decisive battle, and break the blockade. This was not accomplished. And the German Navy, in fact, did not come out to fight an open battle, a pitched battle against the British Navy for the rest of the war. So the truth is they lost, and they didn't want to face that again. So the British blockade became even more iron-like, restrictive. And I said ruthless. They would not allow any food items, medicine, anything to reach Germany. This violates the international agreements. You can blockade war material, not food, not things that would make civilians suffer. And people were pointing this out, especially the Germans, and the British say, oh, well, too bad, old boy. And the Germans kept appealing to the United States. You have to intervene because you say you're neutral, but you say nothing about the British food blockade. Woodrow Wilson, no, I don't want to talk about that. But I want to talk about these incidences like Lusitania and the Arabic and the Essex, all these other, the Sussex, all these other things. If you do it, it's a big incident. If the British do it, we don't even notice it. The British are reading all our cables, we don't notice that. The British are violating American neutrality, we don't notice that. The Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, a liberal Democrat, but yet anti-war, he resigned in 1915 because he came out in the public and he openly criticized Woodrow Wilson and announced to the press the man was trying to get the United States involved in a war with Germany. He wasn't going to have a part of it. So by 1916, the German high command realized that they're slipping. They launched this Battle of Verdun, has not dislodged France from the trench lines. They're beating the Russians like a drum on the Eastern Front. Russia is collapsing internally. The popularity of the Tsar is crashing. Socialist organizations are on the upswing in Russia, stirring up trouble in every direction. There's internal conflict everywhere. But the Russians still don't surrender. Even with this terrible performance on the battlefield, they still fight. And as long as the Russians are in the fight, Germany is in big trouble, you see. So it doesn't really matter if they keep beating Russia in this battle or that various battle. And down, like in Turkey, the Russians are they're kind of beating the Turks a little bit. That's nice. That's a sideline of this war. That's not going to help them win ultimately. But if the Germans and Austrians beat Russia here, they beat Russia there, here, there, that's nice. But they still are not defeating the empire. The Russian Empire is still holding on. And the Germans are losing so many people in these battles. So there's like this big, terrible concern inside of Germany. Now, what's happening in Italy? They're fighting the Austrians along the border, the Austro-Italian border. They pushed the Austrians back a little bit along the Alps. The Austrians pushed the Italians back a little bit along the Alps. This was a mountain war down there in the ice and snow in the mountains. Very interesting thing to study. With the heavy use of ski equipment, and mountain climbing equipment is fascinating. So, that was a stalemate down there, kind of like back and forth. But okay, so 1916, the German High Command, the Kaiser, meaning Caesar, emperor, we say in English, in Russia, and they say Kaiser, Tsar, Austrian, German, that's German, of course, Kaiser. Okay. Oh, and by the way, Francis Joseph died, the emperor, who had been the emperor of Austria since 1848, I might add. Imagine that, 1848 to 1916. He died in 1916, and his grandnephew, Charles I, Karl in German, Carol in Latin. Karl I came to the throne. He's about to be declared a saint by the Catholic Church. His son just died in 2011, the heir to the throne, Otto of Austria. He would have been the emperor if the empire had lasted past 1918. Okay. The German High Command is realizing, this cannot go on. This cannot go on. Well, they don't know what to do. They've already announced they won't do unrestricted submarine warfare. The submarines are hurting Great Britain, but they're not stopping trade with America. And when they instituted restricted submarine warfare, being very careful with the American ships, the British get more and more supplies, and the Germans are still not getting any supplies from world trade, and so they're starting to starve. The people are beginning to starve. I mean, literally starve in Germany. Famine. Now, when the Germans see that their people are starving, then they start to become more of a risk taker. They say, okay, all right. So you're willing to starve the German people. Okay. You're not going to play by the rules of war. Okay. So they decide in 1916, if this is how they want to play it, this is the way we'll play it. It'll be an all-out situation. There'll be nothing we won't do to win this war. We might go down, but we're going to take them down with us. So they decide in 1916 to take an all-out approach. And they start to kind of give some underneath warnings to the United States, not publicly, obviously. They start to send little messages to Wilson. This has to stop. Or things could turn very bad. Wilson said, no, go to hell. Okay. They don't know how to fix the Russia situation, but they realize that there is a socialist problem in Russia, the big socialist party. That's why they had these pogroms in 1905, these outbreaks of repression and murder and all this because of this socialist activity inside of Russia. It had been going back for decades. All right. They had meetings. The Socialist Party had meetings in neutral Switzerland all during the war years. And the Germans say, okay, the most radical socialist guy is Lenin. Lenin, L-E-N-I-N. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov really is his name. His brother was executed for being involved in the murder plot against the Tsar Alexander. I mean, in a normal situation, the German Empire would be trying to have the guy knocked out. You understand? They would be helping Russia to have the guy executed. But they say, well, if we could smuggle this character back into Russia, maybe he could be the spark that would start a terrible revolution in Russia and cause internal conflict to spin out of control, and then Russia would collapse and not be able to continue to fight. And we could take all of our resources and blast the Western Front with everything we've got before the United States arrives with enough support to help the British survive and win the war. So they begin to do this in 1916. And they're keeping an eye on the American election, presidential election. If Woodrow Wilson gets reelected, they know there's no doubt that the United States will enter the war. So they have two chances. If Wilson is reelected, it's a guarantee the United States will enter the war. If Charles Evans Hughes is elected, perhaps he might not enter the U.S. into the war but Hughes was kind of cagey. When he would be in St. Louis, a heavily German area, for instance, campaigning, he would be saying, we got to stay neutral. Yay. Now, if he's over there in New York, he might say, we gotta stand up against aggression, blah, blah, some statement that imply the U.S. needs to get involved. Okay, so Charles Evans Hughes, a good chance the U.S. will get involved. Woodrow Wilson, a guarantee. Now, he campaigned on the promise. Now, this is so interesting. You see, in the anti-war world, like in my circles that I run with, we watch what these presidential guys say, right? So when Woodrow Wilson ran for president, re-election in 1916, his slogan was, he kept us, past tense. He kept us out of war. And the Democratic Party says, this man kept us out of war. And, you know, the American people, they're very susceptible to sloganeering, right? So they say, yeah, I like that guy. He kept us out of war. I don't want to go to war. You know, if you'd taken a poll in 1916, I mean, it would be no contest. Almost everybody in America wanted to stay out of war. No one wants their kids to go die because some king in Europe has a beef against another king in Europe. They just do not want, they follow George Washington's idea of stay out of foreign conflicts. But the president, what's he going to do? Come out in the newspapers and say, I'm conspiring to get involved in a war? There's no way he cannot get reelected. Now, if you watch the modern presidents like Bush, Clinton, Obama, they always say, I want to do everything. I want to stay out of war. They'll say, I'm trying to stay out of war. And I'll tell people, I say, when a president says he's trying to stay out of war, you have to interpret that correctly. It means I'm doing everything I can to get into a war, okay? So when Clinton said, I am trying to stay out of this Yugoslavian conflict in 1999, I told everybody, well, get ready, because the United States is guaranteed to attack Yugoslavia. And then in 2002, George Bush, I'm trying to stay out of conflict with Iraq. I told all the people I know, I said, that means they're going to attack Iraq. Oh, what do you mean? I said, you have to be able to interpret what these people say. So in 1916, he kept us out of war is interpreted, but once he gets reelected, he's going to get us into war. Okay, that's what that meant. Now, the anti-war people, they did pick up on that. They say, this is a fake. He's going to get us involved. The Germans knew very, very clearly that he was going to get involved. So a lot of it rested on that election, that campaign. Okay. All right. Well, Woodrow Wilson was reelected. It's a pretty close election. That makes sense because both candidates supported basically the same positions. The only difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party back then was that the Republicans favored a high tariff and the Democrats favored a low tariff. Otherwise, they basically were the same. Today, the difference is that I don't know what, there are no differences. Okay, now, he did get reelected in a fairly close election in 1916, November. So that's when the Germans say, all right, he's reelected. There's going to be a war against, the United States will declare war on us. They're going to make war against Germany, who has no interest in fighting the United States. But that's okay. So you got to think about these things from other people's points of view. If you know somebody's out to get you, like a country's conspiring to attack you, you know this. Naturally, you're going to make your plans. So Germany says, we're going to make plans. We're already losing, so we don't have much to lose anyway. Japan had attacked Germany in 1914. Why? Because Japan had a great anger against Germany? No, because Japan wanted to grab German territory in the east, all the German colonies in China and all the big, vast German territories in east, the Pacific Ocean, the Mariana Islands, the Caroline Islands, and these other areas. So Japan attacked and they took it all. Now the Germans knew that it was nothing personal. The Japanese were just greedy and they wanted land, islands. No problem. So the Germans say, look, let's see if perhaps the Japanese would like to drop out of the war against us, because they weren't doing anything to help in Europe anyway. Japan was a terrible ally. They grabbed all the land they wanted in Asia and the Pacific, and that was about all they did. They weren't about to send people over there to die in Europe because a bunch of white people are killing each other. Japanese could care less about that. The Germans knew this. But the Germans knew that the Americans and the French and the British owned lots of territories in the East as well, and the Dutch. And perhaps they might want to grab some of that. And in fact, the Japanese did want to grab those territories. They wouldn't have mind. They would have been very happy to grab the Philippine Islands, Guam, perhaps Hawaii, Hong Kong, Thailand, all this, French Indochina, if the opportunity presented itself. So the Germans knew this. So they start to contact Japanese, say, look, we understand why you attacked us. No problem. It's, you know, it's done. It's done. You've grabbed the territory. That's we count that as a loss. But perhaps you might be interested in flipping the card and joining us in an alliance against these imperialist allies, whatever. And the Japanese say, okay, that is something to look at. They were not rebuffed by Japan. Japan doesn't, you know, say, yeah, we're going to do it. But they, their general attitude was, that is something to look at. Now, we know they acted on that in 1941, but they're looking at it. This is interesting. It's interesting, but Japan is smart. They know that Germany's not doing this for their benefit. It's like Don Corleone said in The Godfather, why you come to me? I mean, why do I deserve such generosity? And that's what the Japanese attitude is. So why, you know, why are you coming to us? I mean, the Japanese know the Germans need friends, they need help. So they're not going to jump in if they don't think they can pull it off. They're just going to look at it. Okay, we're going to look at it. The United States goes to the Germans go to an even more obvious ally, and this is Mexico. You say Mexico, yes, this is right. The United States have been bothering Mexico since 1914. I mean, you got to remember now, Woodrow Wilson is one of these liberal do-gooders, and you always have to watch out for a liberal do-gooder, because a liberal do-gooder is a person we define this as a guy who will sacrifice your whole family to impose his will and his idea of democracy upon another country. This is the definition of a liberal do-gooder. Get this in your head. A guy who will sacrifice your whole, not his, of course, your whole family, not to mention all your savings account, to impose his will and his idea of democracy upon another country. Now, a war broke out in Mexico in 1910 between various factions, and they all wanted to take over the government. Woodrow Wilson decided he knew best about who should run Mexico. Yeah, he knew better. So he starts telling the Mexicans, look, here's what I want you to do, and here's how I want you to run your government. For some reason, the Mexicans were offended by this idea that the United States would dictate to them what kind of government they would have. Imagine that. So by 1916, Mexico and the United States were in a virtual state of war. The United States Army had actually entered Mexico and occupied large parts of Mexico. So the Germans said, look, here's a country that's on the verge of fighting the United States anyway. Perhaps we can help spark it off. So they start to talk to Mexico, and they say, look, we understand you're having a lot of problems with those bullies. We are too. They are very bad, you know. So the Mexicans say, yeah, that country stole half our country once. The Germans say, we know it's terrible. And we admire Mexico so much, you know, the Germans, you know, we love Mexico so much. We're so interested in the welfare of Mexico, as you would imagine. Well, in that case, how about you join us in an alliance against the United States? Like, we'll team up together. You dumb Hispanics. You know, this is the German attitude. Hey, you dummies. This is what they're really thinking. How about you team up with us and we'll fight the United States together? And then once we win, you can have Texas, New Mexico, Arizona back as part of Mexico. Like, you can't beat England and France, right, over in Europe, but somehow you're going to help Mexico take over the Southwest, right? This is going to happen. But the Mexicans say, yeah, all right. But at first they're thinking, okay. Now, of course, obviously, the Germans, they could care less if Mexico exists, right? But they would like to see Mexico join. If they can bait Mexico into joining an attack on the United States, this would be such a distraction for the U.S. that they wouldn't be able to adequately join the war against Germany in Europe. And then Germany might be able to smash the British-French alliance before the U.S. can adequately respond. The Mexicans do show interest, but they're wary of it. And rightfully so. Here's a country that never showed you any regard in the history of the world. And all of a sudden they're showing up, offering you this wonderful alliance. So the Mexicans are like, I don't know, man. I mean, would they like to attack the United States and get land back? Yeah, of course. If they thought they could team up with Germany and attack the United States and get Texas and New Mexico and Arizona back, would they join? Yeah, immediately. I mean, they wouldn't do it anymore. Well, yeah, they would still do it today. But anyway, yeah, obviously they would do it. But Mexico knows that if this was done, if they did join Germany in a war against the United States, they're not going to get Texas back. They're not going to get New Mexico back. There's not going to be a Mexico, okay? So Mexico realizes this. If they really did declare war on the United States, there wouldn't be a Mexico. It would just be the United States all the way down to the Guatemalan border. They know this. They realize this. Well, the British intelligence apparatus being what it is, they intercept the German message to Mexico, the Zimmerman telegram, the Zimmerman note from the German foreign minister. And they immediately present this to the president and the New York Times newspaper. For obvious reasons, the New York Times has and is always pro-British and pro-involvement in foreign affairs and the empire, you know, the whole American-British axis and, you know, all that. All right, so this is what Wilson needs. He's already won re-election, so he's not going to run for a third term anyway. So, hey, he's got it made. Now the jig is up. He can do whatever he wants. but maybe Congress isn't going to go along with it, so he needs a good incident. The Lusitania was a really good incident, but that didn't work out. Now this is a great incident. So it comes out in the press. Oh, yeah. Germany has been conspiring to get Japan and Mexico into a war with the United States. Well, even many of the neutralist people get excited. You know, they don't sit back and think, you know, oh, we have to fight Germany now. And then the big propaganda was they're going to take over the world. I had somebody tell me this the other day at lunch. Well, we had to fight Germany because they were going to try to take over the world. I said, really? Where'd you read that? In the New York Times? I said, how do you suppose Germany was going to take over the world at any point in history? If they couldn't, now let's think about this intelligently, not emotionally. I told this guy at lunch on Easter Sunday, I said, how do you suppose Germany was going to take over the world? Now, the world's a big place. They can't get their troops 30 miles across the English Channel to go fight Great Britain on the English soil, you know, England. They can't get troops 30 miles across the English Channel. They can't even get to Paris in 1914. They did it in 1940. But they're going to take over the world? Well, that's an incredible thing. Now, this would be the most amazing feat ever, right? You can't get your troops 30 miles across a narrow body of water, but you're going to come all the way across the Atlantic Ocean with hundreds of ships and thousands of men, and you're going to land in New Jersey and in Georgia. You're going to march across all these states, and you're going to take over America. Wow, this is an amazing thing. I hear people say this a lot. You know, after Pearl Harbor, Japan could have taken over America. Taken over America. This is amazing. Can't take over China. Okay, you can't take over China, who's 1,000 times weaker than America, right? You can't take over China in 1937, 38, 39, 40, 41. All these years, you can't take over China. And you fought Russia once in 1939 and got your beat. But you're going to come and take over America. Wake up, people. Use some sense. Think about that. Oh, but they were going to take over Hawaii. Okay, well, why didn't they? Take it over. Okay, back to 1916, 17. So now we got this double hit. Germany's conspiring to get Japan into a war against us. And Mexico. And the Germans announced, by the way, this is February, I believe. By the way, we are going to resume unrestricted submarine warfare in the North Sea. And the reason being is we've begged the United States. We've begged the United States to, and I'm not taking a pro-German position in this discussion, by the way. I'm just presenting the facts, the actual facts, not the, you know, the what to tell you. We've begged the United States to call the British on the carpet, because they always are quick to call us on the carpet for any violation if we drop a thumbtack on the ground. On the carpet for doing the food blockade. And Woodrow Wilson has basically told us to get lost, get stuffed. We've done this for over 2 years. We've begged this man to do this. He's obviously not neutral. That being the case, we are declaring unrestricted submarine warfare in the North Sea, meaning this is what this means. The Germans, you know, they're Germans, right? So they're gonna, when the Germans flip out, they flip out. I mean, they don't just flip out like me or you. I mean, they really flip out. Like you see Valkyries flying over, right? Like this is the ring of the Nibelung. All right. It gets really serious. So they say, this is the way it's going to be. This is what this means. If we see a ship, we're going to sink it. We're not going to give a warning. We don't care whose flag's on there. We don't care if it's got a big flag with stars and stripes and it's playing. the Star Spangled Banner, it's going down. That ship will not arrive on the shore of Great Britain unmolested. You want to play rough? We can play real rough. And this is basically what they know. Well, they know that once they make that announcement, the United States is going to go to war with them. But by this point, they don't care because they're going to lose anyway. They realized by late 1916, early 1917, we're going to lose anyway. But if we're going down, we're taking a lot of people with us. And so this is what Ludendorff and the Kaiser, William II, Hohenzollern, and the German High Command decides. If we got to go down, we're taking people with us. And that's the way it's going to be. But they make some really bad decisions, right? So, and I'm talking about sneaking Lenin into Russia. Okay, so they sneak Lenin into Russia. He goes into Russia and he helps exacerbate the situation. Well, the Tsar had already abdicated in early 1917, right when all this was reaching ahead in America. The Tsar surrendered, not surrendered, but abdicated. He gave up. He wanted to go to Great Britain. His relatives, you know. The British say, no, well, you know, you're a dictator and we're a democracy. They say that in all the newspapers. It sounds great. So if we let an evil dictator, even though you're our ally, come into our country, it would look bad in the newspapers. Even though we basically baited you into going to war with us, you know, on our behalf. Oh, well, you've been overthrown, so too bad for you. Well, good luck to you, old boy, and I hope your family does well. We wish you the best. Russia's government collapsed. The Tsar's government was overthrown by the Kerensky government, a democratic socialist government, sort of like Bernie Sanders type outfit. They placed the Tsar under arrest. His family was put under arrest and not allowed to leave the country. So they're democratic socialists. One day, they say, they're going to have elections and let the people decide. Meanwhile, that ain't going to happen. All right, so now Russia has a socialist government, and they're going to continue to fight the Germans. This is Kerensky's, some people say, his mistake. They're going to continue to fight the Germans. All right, yeah. But they do terrible, you know, and so the more radical socialist, and what is a communist? What is the difference between a communist and a socialist? The difference is that a communist is a socialist in a hurry. So Lenin launches his communist revolution in later November 1917, and they overthrow the government. They overthrow the democratic socialists. The Bolsheviks overthrow the Mensheviks. One faction overthrows the other faction. And they set up a more, what you would call, purified socialist government, one that's not using any pretenses. It's like, you know, the Lenin government, the Bolsheviks, their attitude is, yeah, we kill people. We're communists. We kill people. We don't care. And that was what Karl Marx said, you know. I mean, that's why he said we use the word communist. You know, we're not just socialists. We don't sit around in a meeting room talk about theories. We will set off a car bomb. We will massacre an entire ethnic group. We're more purified socialists, but we know they're open about it. So Lenin sets up the Bolshevik socialist communist government of Russia. And of course, they start to commit mass murder. You know, well, okay, they killed 20 million people, give or take a few. No, you haven't heard that much in the news, have you? But anyway, so, you know, I didn't say 6 million people. I say 20 million people. All right. It's 38 million in China, but all right. Now, this is going to come back to haunt Germany later if I make a post-war video, about the post-war. Germany is going to rue the day that they let this character get control of Russia. It's going to redound to their distinct disadvantage, okay? Actually, it's going to redound to their distinct disadvantage before the end of the war. By 1918, Lennon, would he like to massacre all the Germans? Sure, except for the socialists, but he's got other fish to fry. He's got to consolidate power in Russia. And to his inconvenience, not only did the Russian anti-communist elements rise up against him, also the United States, Great Britain, France, and Japan sent troops into Russia in 1918, 1919 to try to defeat him. This is a little part of World War I that most people don't know about, that the United States government sent U.S., I think it was the Marines, if I'm not mistaken, but whatever, the U.S. military into Russia, mostly Eastern Russia, Siberia, to fight the communists. But they had more trouble with the Japanese, apparently. They were trying to grab land instead of fighting the communists. All right, but a lot of people don't know that the U.S. Army was fighting Russian communists in Russia up until 1919. This is a fact. Look it up. I can guarantee you this is what happened. But by 1918, the Russians realized, or Lenin, I should say, I cannot do all these things at once. I cannot try to set up a communist dictatorship in Russia and fight Germany and Austria at the same time. So this is what I'll do. I'll buy time. And the way I'll buy time is I'll make peace with Germany. And I'll take over Russia. And later on, we'll get all that land back. That's not a big problem. They actually did get all the land back. So early 1918, the communists in Russia, the Bolsheviks, began negotiations with the German Empire, and they worked out a treaty, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And that means something to people that know about 1939. And they called the war off, and they let the Germans occupy vast stretches of Western Russia. And the Russians never intend that this will last. They just say, let them have it for now. We can counterattack later and take it all back. And we'll murder lots of them. Not a problem. Meanwhile, they felt threatened because of the anti-communists, the White Russians, they called them, because of the white flag, the white forces, I mean, the white faction, the white flag. This goes back to the French Revolution. If they lose, if the white flag defeats the red flag, and they rescue the Tsar, Nicholas II Romanov, this could be a real problem because he's seen, the people do look at him in a sympathetic light. He is Christian, and they kind of look at him as sort of a victim of conspiratorial activity. This is the way Russians look at him. So Lenin decides, hey, I feel threatened by the Tsar and his family. So they order the murder of not only Nicholas II, but his wife and all of his children in 1918. This is a very serious incident because they raised their hand against the emperor. They go into the cellar in Ekaterinburg and they murder the Tsar and all of his children, which of course is capital treason. I mean, just to have them under arrest and treat them with an disrespectful manner is a capital treason, but to murder the Tsar and his whole family, this is very bad. So from that point, the Communist Party of Russia all members of the Communist Party were guilty of capital treason and subject to immediate execution. And this would probably, I guess you could say, apply to all members of the Communist Party worldwide. But anyway, let's get off of that. That's a little touchy. Hey, but I'm not a communist. You join the party. All right. We don't want to get into all these treasons and we don't want to get into treason and the repercussions thereof. Okay, so Germany gets one thing accomplished. They knocked Russia out of the war in 1918, but they got another very serious problem. America is coming in. Now, their idea was they could knock Russia out of the war, transfer the vast majority of the forces to the west, and hit France and Great Britain with a series of hammer blows and knock them out of the war before the U.S. arrives in force. This failed. In April 1917, the Congress of the United States did, this is back when they followed the Constitution to a little, a little bit. The Congress declared war on Germany. It was not a unanimous vote. There were lots of people in Congress voted against war, and they were accusing Wilson. You're trying to bait the Americans into going to war. You're a rat. You're pro-British, blah, blah, blah. They had enough people that were going to fall for it, so they declared war on Germany, which is interesting. This is a country that had absolutely zero interest in fighting the United States in 1916 or later on. Okay. But, declaring war don't mean you're ready to fight. See, it's going to take the United States many months to get ready. They're pretty unprepared to go over there and land troops in France and fight Germany. But it did not work out for Germany because it took them a lot longer than they were hoping to get Russia to surrender and drop out of the war. So by the time the Germans were able to launch this incredibly powerful attack, this offensive, in March 1918, it was too late. The United States troops were arriving by the thousands and thousands every week. The Germans did launch this great attack, this Kaiserschlacht. And they were using all these new innovative stormtrooper methods to get around the trench warfare, and it was successful. But the problem for Germany is that they were too worn out. This was their, a boxer who's been boxing for many rounds, and it's the last round, and they've got a little bit of energy left, and they're going to hit you with all the haymakers they can hit you with, but you're still standing, but they've got nothing left in the tank. So Germany hits France with these hammer blows, and they're heading toward Paris again, 1918. And they got within 39 miles of Paris again. They caused great panic, concern in France. But the United States Army is arriving in sufficient force to slow and stop the German advance 39 miles from Paris. And they begin to push the Germans back, all through June, July, August. It was really August when they collapsed. August, September, October of 1918. Okay, the German high command realizes that if they don't pull this off, they cannot win. They cannot win. The people are starving. There are socialist organizations causing uprisings all across Germany. Yeah, encouraged by Lennon, by the way, in Russia. See, this was the terrible risk that Germany took. We're going to help the communists sneak into Russia. Now the communists that you snuck into Russia is helping to foment revolution within your country. You dance with the devil. Now you have to pay. And oh, are they paying? The German Navy is in an uprising. There's socialist elements all throughout the German Navy. They're in an uprising. Parts of the German army are in an uprising. Riots are breaking out in the cities. Now the Kaiser, he's the kind of guy, he wants to fight to the death. He's like, let's fight. Let them come into Germany. We fight in the streets in Berlin, house to house, and then when they're right outside the bunker, we shoot ourselves. That kind of guy, Ludendorff says, well, look, you want your family to wind up like the Tsar's family? All you want your children killed? No. The Tsar's attitude is, the Kaiser's attitude, I don't care if I die, That's really his attitude. He's kind of a hardcore guy. He's a goofy guy, like strange. He's real strange, but that was his attitude, hardcore nationalist. If I die, I don't care. We fight, we never give up. But they say, you want your family to be murdered like the Tsar's family? No, he gets concerned. No, I don't want that. So Ludendorff tells the Kaiser in early November 1918, look, Austria has collapsed. Multiculturalism did not help Austria. All the ethnic groups rose up. They basically all seceded from the empire, and Austria collapsed in October and said, we have to get out the war. There's no one else to fight for them. The Turks say, we're out, because the British are doing terrible, but by 1917, they were able to start pushing towards the interior of Turkey. And so in October, I think it was October 30th, they say, look, That was Austria, October 30th. But Turkey right before that, the Ottoman Turks said we got to give up. They tell the Germans, nothing personal. We finished. I mean, we've been having internal problems for 100 years, and you know, you talked us into this, and we can't do it. We have no more money. We got no more chance to survive. We're out. We're out. And they lost everything. The Turks lost everything except for Turkey itself. They lost all their overseas all their external territories: Iraq, Kuwait, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, you know, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, everything. So they were the shambles, man. Bulgaria gives up. I mean, they had no chance anyway. Austria collapses. Austria is a small country. They just ruled a huge empire, but they say we're out. We're out. So it's Germany alone now. November 1918, they're alone. And the Kaiser, you know, he's talking to Ludendorff, you know, who's basically become like a dictator of Germany. He's got so much power. He's such a genius, you know, leading the German. Under all this pressure, and with almost no chance of winning, Germany's still able to hold out and inflict extreme damage on the enemy, even up till November 1918. I mean, this is no easy nut to crack, believe me. So the Kaiser's telling Ludendorff, what do you want to do? Just fight to the death? You know, we're Germans and blah, blah, blah. We're romantic, yeah. But Ludendorff says, I don't see any hope for that, really, honestly. He says, really, the big danger is that we hold out and fight like we all want to do. I mean, I'm Ludendorff, you know, I'd rather fight to, and Hindenburg too. I'd rather fight to the death too. But the real danger is that Germany will fall to a communist government. So if you ask me, Ludendorff gives this advice to the Kaiser. If you ask me, I would just quit and get out. This would be my advice. The German army cannot guarantee your safety. He really tells the Kaiser that, I cannot guarantee your safety. I'm serious. You might want to just quit and get out. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm just advising it. So the Kaiser, William II, says, I get your point. I'm out. He just abdicates. He doesn't even try to put his son on the throne, the crown prince. He just gets on a train and gets out and goes to the Netherlands, a country that was very friendly towards Germany. And he lives in the Netherlands until he died in 1941. He just gets out, gets his family out. Many of them return to Germany later, and they're unmolested. Okay, well, the new German government takes over. Socialist, democratic socialist government, sort of like a Bernie Sanders type government. But they're interesting because they're still German nationalists. They love Germany, but they're socialists. They love a red Germany. But anyway, you know, so they tell the Allies, all right, Woodrow Wilson's been promoting the 14 points. Now, Woodrow Wilson, you know, he like say all these like glittering generalities, you know, these platitudes. We want a peace without victory. We want a new world order where there's no secret treaties and all the countries unite in a League of Nations where we stop war, all this, you know, mumbo jumbo stuff. But the Germans picked up on this thing about no victors, a peace without victory. So the Germans are telling the United States, so you're saying nobody will win. And the US say, that's right, we just call it off. There's no winners. We just call it even. You know, it's just like we call it off and we make the world safe for democracy. And the US was already fighting the communists in Russia. So Germany's thinking, well, maybe this guy is, you know, as nutty as he is and as pie in the sky and idealistic as he is with all his unrealistic goals, maybe he'll treat us okay. We got no other choice. So they say, okay, look, we're willing to call the war off if you intend to truly follow the 14 points of a peace without victory. Oh, yeah. Well, of course, we know today, we, the historians, people that study history, we know today that this whole thing was really an attempt to get the German people to rise up against the government. Because you make it seem like the government's fighting and it's going to let you die for their monarchy. And we'll have a peace with no victory. So, but the Germans say, okay, let's do it. So they call the war off November 11th at 11 a.m. 1918. An armistice, a ceasefire. The war is over. Contingent upon a final peace treaty. And part of the negotiation. I know this video is running long, but it's not as long as World War I, right? So part of the settlement was, okay, to show good faith that you're not trying to trick us like you're working on some secret weapon. You disarm, you pull back from the borders, you let the Allies occupy Western Germany up to the Rhine River. You dismantle your army down to 100,000 people, basically with any inability to continue to fight. You abandon your occupation of Eastern Europe, and you turn over your navy to the Allies as sort of earnest money to show that you're serious. So you turn over you turn the German Navy over to the Allies, which would mean you would be incapable of fighting now. And then we'll negotiate a fair settlement and we'll call the war off. And the Germans say, let's do it. I'm talking about the new German Federal Republic, the Republic of Germany. Okay, so they institute this. August 11th, 1918, peace comes to Europe, contingent upon a final settlement. Okay, hold on a minute. Now, Great Britain and France, they're going to play along with this garbage, all right? Like, we're going to have peace in the world and there'll be no victors and all of that. Of course, they're going to play along with it. They need America's help. So they're going to use Wilson. They don't really believe all of his garbage about world peace and all that, but they're going to play along with the guy because they need America's help. In other words, they're going to use America for their own advantage. That's right. That's why it's bad to be in an alliance, because an alliance means a country's going to do it for their advantage, not for you. Countries don't join alliances to help you. Countries join alliances to help them. And when the chips are down, in most cases, they're not going to show up. Most countries are not going to die for you. You should think about that. All right. They do it. They call the war off. Oh, these 4 years of tragedy. Terrible, horrible, horrible. 10 million people minimum killed. And what did they accomplish? Nothing. Nothing. Okay. They sit down in Versailles, the old palace of the Bourbon kings of France. They start to negotiate. Or you should say, dictate to the Germans. Here's what we're going to do. Okay, the Germans are just, they're there. They're not allowed to, they're actually not allowed to negotiate. They just say, you wait around, and then we're going to present you the treaty. And we all know there's a bunch of controversy about how to reset the borders of Europe. And Woodrow Wilson, for whatever reason, was particularly obsessed with Poland, making sure Poland was big. Oh, and Poland got to be big, like way bigger than it should have been, which led to a lot of conflicts 20 years later. But the guy is like totally unreasonable, and he lives in a dream world, really. That's why a lot of his advisors would quit and say the guy, he lives in this fantasy world. He's a completely unreasonable person. But Woodrow Wilson didn't care because he was the smartest person in the world by his own admission. He knew more than anybody ever knew. This is a dangerous president, right? When you know somebody, when there's a guy who knows more than anybody will ever know. His biggest concern besides Poland was setting up the League of Nations, because he wants to have this World Congress where all the countries of the world will come together and will hang out and make peace on the world through the use of force, unrelenting, irresistible, and almighty and ruthless force that we will bring down upon your head if you ever stand up to America's dictates upon your internal operations. And this is how we'll bring peace to the world. We want peace like a river. And so a lot of people in America, they're like, oh, we don't want to get entangled with this. But Woodrow Wilson says, no, 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 I got to have the League of Nations now. The Germans, they're saying, oh, what are they going to do? What's going to happen? And so finally, they present to the Germans, okay, here's the peace treaty. And it's so fair, because here's what's going to happen. Germany is going to lose all their overseas territories. And Austria is not allowed to join with Germany. Now, part of the treaty is all countries in the world will have self-determination. Every country will determine what their government will be like, except for the Arab countries, which are going to come under the control of Great Britain and France, and except for like a bunch of countries in Europe that we don't like, and except for other countries in Asia like Vietnam that we don't care about. But all the countries in the world will have self-government that we'll determine. You know, we'll determine what kind of self-government they have, and they'll have any leader they want that we'll approve of. And here's the borders of Europe that we'll impose on the continent. And Austria, you're not allowed to join Germany, even though you chose to join Germany as a new country called, you know, Greater Germany. You can't join Germany, even though that's your wish, because we don't like you. This is what happened. Austria wanted to join Germany and unite with them as a single country again, like they had been in the First Reich. And the Allies said, oh, no, you can't do that. And the Austrians said, but you just told us we could have self-determination. Oh, well, no, we don't really mean what we say. We just say all that because people read the paper and they're ignorant. Oh, we thought we could. Okay. And they tell Germany, oh, and we get to keep all of your Navy, and you can only have 100,000 troops in your army forever, and you can never have an air force. And oh, you have to pay for the entire war. We're going to give you a bill that's like more than your whole country's worth. Like, you have to pay this bill even though your whole country's not worth as much as this bill. It's called reparations. You have to pay for the whole war. And oh, one more thing, you have to sign this little part here in the treaty that says that you're responsible for the whole war. Germany admits that they are responsible for causing the whole war, so they bear moral responsibility for the war. So just you have till June 21st to sign it, or we'll attack you. So just sign right there, and then we'll have peace. So the Germans read this treaty. The German representative at Versailles, he almost fainted. Like, he said, what is this? I mean, I don't understand what's going on. He said, I can't bring this back. I can't bring this back to Germany. They're not going to sign this. This will start, who could sign this? They said, no, you have to, you know, we'll attack you. And then, so they go back to Germany and they say, here's what the treaty says. Now, this caused an extreme crisis in Germany. When they read the treaty, it almost caused a civil war in Germany. The German people say, how can we fight now? They got our Navy. They're occupying the country all the way to the Rhine River. It's like, it was literally like 100% of the German people were appalled. And so they developed two factions inside of Germany. One faction was the compromisers, the president of Germany and the parliament, the Reichstag say, okay, we have to sign it, because if we don't, and Ludendorff is telling the president this, Ludendorff's still in power. He said, look, we could resist. I mean, the treaty is obviously, they pulled a switch on us. They said, we'll have a peace with no victory and all this, and now they're switching it on us. And we could resist, and we should resist. He said, but here's what's going to happen. He tells the president of Germany, here's what's going to happen. If we refuse to sign this treaty, the Allies will invade. Maybe not the United States, because they're out of it. I mean, they're like, you know, we're out. But the British and the French will invade, and they'll beat us, and the Russians will come in from the east. They will beat us. Germany will be beaten, and we'll fall to a communist government. This is what I say is almost an absolute guarantee. And we'll all be killed, you know. So Ludendorff tells him, you got to sign it to buy time. Let's sign the damn treaty. No, we're not going to follow it. We're going to build up an air force. We're going to build up a way bigger army than 100,000 people, and we're going to get revenge on those. Okay, so he said, we're going to sign it, and we're not going to follow it, and we're going to build the country up. But 20 years down the road, we'll pay him back. 30 years down the road. So that's the compromises. Let's sign the treaty now. And then we're going to settle everything later. In spades. Let's do it that way. Now, the other faction was the extreme nationalist. You know, they say, screw that. We never sign in it. Let them invade. It's a dishonorable thing to sign this horrible treaty, this trick, this insult. Let them invade. We fight them street to, you know, town to town, street to street. Let them come into Berlin. We fight until we have the last bullet. We die. We all die. We don't care. This is this nationalist mindset. And then like a phoenix from the ashes, the German people will rise up and we'll all be heroes. Like there'll be a legend that'll be created. This is literally how they're thinking. You know, go read. So we'll all die, but we won't really die because this Deutsches Reich will rise up like a phoenix. And then we'll destroy all of them in this mythical, this like mystical, not mythical, this mystical Deutsches resurgence. Now the compromisers say, well, that sounds nice. You know, that's poetic. But we don't see any Valkyries flying over the sky, man. You go listen to Wagner, but we signing it. And then we're going to pay him back later. So this is the only two, really the only two schools of thought. Sign it and pay him back later, or fight to the death, and there'll be this mystical Deutschlander Risorgimento that'll rise up and smite the world. All right, well, you know what faction took over in 1933? You know, this one that believes in this poetic transcendence, this mystical vengeance. But they're more practical. The more practical side takes over. You know, comes, you know, wins the day. And so the German government says, no, no, we have to sign. We have to sign. So they tell the Allies, we'll sign it. Okay. We'll sign it. The Allies don't really like their attitude at the meeting. They don't stand up to address the, you know, at the meeting, you would stand up at the table to address the participants. The German representative sat in his chair, would never stand up to address the crowd. Obviously to show disrespect. So he said, we'll sign this great betrayal and we'll be friends. The Allies didn't believe it, that they were going to be friends. But the German government said, we'll sign it. It'll be wonderful. And we'll pay you everything we'll pay you all the money. And we'll have peace in the world. Like a big happy family. Like a brotherhood of man. That's what we're going to do. We'll sign this so that we can all be friends. So, June 21st, 1919, the day came. The Germans could have refused, and they would have been attacked. They signed the Treaty of Versailles. All the people who signed it were murdered later because the nationalists in Germany said they committed high treason. Okay, but they signed the treaty and they had peace in the world. All this wonderful peace. Over there in Scotland, in Scapa Flow, this is a harbor in Scotland, northern Scotland, where the German Navy was interned under surveillance of the British Navy. Right at the moment that the Germans signed the treaty, on that day, that very day, June 21st, the British lookouts monitoring the German Navy noticed the most bizarre sight. All the German ships were flying the Imperial battle flag, which had been lowered when they surrendered the ships. Every single German ship in that in that harbor were flying the German imperial battle flag. And many of them were listing to the side and obviously sinking, because Rear Admiral Ludwig von Reuter had ordered that every German ship would be sunk at the bottom of the sea before any German ship would ever be turned over to the Allies and take part in this horrendous betrayal. So this incident at Scapa Flow, when the entire German fleet was sunk by the German sailors, showed you the true attitude that they had toward the Treaty of Versailles.